Okay, and I'm going to take us live now.
Do you want me to?
It's meeting is being live streamed. Okay, I believe we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SPARC Expert Chats. I'm Rachel, the network coordinator for SPARC. And today I'm joining you from what is currently referred to as Leeds and Grenville County, but is the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Algonquin peoples. This area is covered under the Crawford Purchase of 1783, an unlawful and illegal purchase. Today, we have the privilege of joining together virtually and using technology that is steeped in the colonial mindset and that continues to marginalize Indigenous communities around the province. The need for better access to internet and technology in our Indigenous communities is ongoing and something we should all take a moment to consider and to try and assist in bringing about. In light of the discoveries of unmarked graves of Indigenous children, first in Kamloops and since across the rest of the country, and the fight for land and water protection being led by Indigenous communities, right now I'm thinking specifically of what's happening in BC, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that my privilege has allowed me to not clearly see or have the need to participate in this part of our collective story, but there are those who this luxury is not afforded to. They have no choice but to face this history and this fight for protection daily. I want to say now that I will continue to seek ways to further educate myself and others and to be a better ally to members of our Indigenous communities across the country. So thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're joined by Devon Hardy from Creative Green Tools Canada. Devon is an environmental specialist with a background in environmental sciences and water resources management, and more than 6 years of professional experience in her field. For the last several years, she's been working to combine her technical knowledge of environmental sciences and impact measurement with her passion for arts and culture by collaborating on carbon footprinting and sustainability initiatives in partnership with Ecosino, the St. Ambrose Montreal Fringe Festival, the Quebec Drama Federation, and the Centre for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, amongst others. She's currently the project manager for the Canadian Creative Green Tools adaptation. Welcome, Devon.
Thank you, Rachel.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great.
I guess
logging into our Facebook, sorry folks, catching up with everybody to make sure we don't have any questions yet. But I just wanted to again say welcome to Devon, and I'm going to turn it over to her to present.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. As Rachel said, my name is Devon Hardy, and I'm the project manager for the Creative Green Tools adaptation project that is currently underway. I'm calling in today from Tiohtià:ke, which is colonially known as Montreal, and that is the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. So Rachel invited me today, and I'm very excited to be here, and I'm going to share a presentation with you. I'll just share my screen, and what I'm going to do is just give you just a really brief intro to the Creative Green Tools and what we've been working on, what we're doing, and then we'll open it up for questions. So just give me a moment. Okay. Okay, here we have sharing my screen. Great. So I'll start off the presentation just by introducing who the key players are, who's been working with us. Currently, the project is being executed by 4 main partners. We have the Centre for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, which has had a relationship with Julie's Bicycle for over a decade, and has been the main driver of the project from the beginning. The Quebec Drama Federation took the initiative to apply for funding for the project, first starting in 2019, and they are presently the recipients of their second Sector Innovation and Development Grant from the Canada Council for the Arts to carry out this project. So thank you to the CCA multiple times. They are joined by Climatable, who joined the project at the beginning of 2021 with funding from the Government of Canada's Sustainable Development Goals program. And then the CQEER, who has been partnering with us for well over a year and recently received funding from the Government of Quebec to increase our engagement with Francophone communities and improve the French version of the Creative Green tools. And of course, those are not the only partners. We have a long list of partners, which is actually growing, including SPARC. So thank you for your contribution to the project so far. And I really cannot say how much this whole coalition of partner organizations is making it possible for the project to reach its full potential. It's really been a joint effort. And I've been so thankful to everybody who's been involved. So what are the Creative Green tools? What is Creative Green? Just in case anybody isn't familiar with the tools yet, they are a comprehensive set of carbon calculation and reporting tools that were created specifically for the arts and culture sector. So they provide the sector with a simple and accessible way to calculate and report on their environmental impacts. And they're basically tailored to take into account the specific scope of activities that are common in arts and culture. So essentially, users can create footprints for buildings like offices, theaters, or museums, or projects, which can include a whole bunch of things: tours, theatrical productions, exhibits, festivals, any kind of event. The impacts taken into account include energy, water, waste, travel, freight, materials even, and more than that as well. So to give you a little bit more background on the tools, they were created in 2009 by a UK-based organization called Julie's Bicycle, whose mission is to support the creative community to act on climate change and environmental sustainability. And they were designed to be specifically simple and accessible to motivate change in the industry. It wasn't about making them fit with, international carbon accounting standards. They really wanted them to be easy to use from the user side so that they would be accessible to any organization, no matter what their skill or knowledge level in environmental impacts were, or whatever their resource availability was. And since they've been created, they've been continuously improved and updated based on feedback from the sector, which has resulted in a really high quality platform. And it's helped England's arts and culture sector to achieve a 41% reduction in carbon emissions over a 6-year period. So that's huge. So to give you, we've been working on this for a little while. The first year that we were working on the tools, we were basically just doing research and consultation. We were talking to the sector. We were consulting. We consulted with about 44 different organizations from across Canada, from different subsectors of arts and culture, and it really helped us to determine that this was something that was actually wanted and needed and would be feasible to implement. But it also helped us to determine what features we needed to have in the tools and in the programming to make them useful and beneficial for the sector. So we're really proud that that what we're building right now has been built based on the demonstrated needs of the sector and not necessarily just what we think is needed. So yeah, we really feel that the year of research and consultation has paid off. So the Creative Green tools will be bilingual in English and French. And as I said earlier, we're working with the CQEER to make sure that not only the tools, but the programming is bilingual and that we're equally engaged with Francophone communities as we are with Anglophone communities. They will be accessible. In the summer, we carried out a web accessibility audit to make sure that the tools are able to be used by anybody, regardless of ability. They will be inclusive. We've been working to ensure that the language we use is inclusive and that the site itself is a welcoming digital environment for Indigenous users as well as marginalized communities. And we've been working with an Indigenous consulting agency called Nehewin. They're based out in Edmonton or Treaty 6 territory. And they've been running this national Indigenous engagement strategy since April of this year. And they're helping us they've been talking with Indigenous-led organizations, communities, knowledge keepers to help us, figure out ways that we can make the tools into this welcoming digital environment for Indigenous users, as well as having inclusive programming. And of course, they will be free to use. We really didn't want to create any additional barriers to engaging with the tools. And we really wanted them to be, accessible and for anyone to be able to use them, even if they didn't necessarily have a lot of resources at their disposal. And we're hoping for launch in 2022, in early 2022, hopefully March. That's when we hope they'll be public. So this screenshot just gives you an example of what data entry looks like on the tools. The platform has a clean interface. Data entry is simplified on the user end as much as possible. And the tabs that users are shown are tailored to the type of footprint they're creating. So that takes some of the guesswork out of the carbon footprinting process. You don't have to try to select which impacts you should be taking into account. It's done for you. And the CG tools also have a section called Beyond Carbon that aims to build awareness and surveys users about practices that don't necessarily lead to reductions in their measured carbon footprints, but still have positive environmental outcomes. So this section has questions related to everyday environmental practices, governance and leadership, climate change adaptation and resilience, Indigenous sovereignty, and more. It's getting more and more comprehensive with every iteration of the tools. So there are a lot of benefits to disseminating the CG tools across Canada. They provide an accessible framework within which arts and culture organizations can quantify their greenhouse gas emissions and work to reduce them. And for a lot of organizations, this may be the first step that they take towards engaging in climate action. And it's a step that's concrete and manageable. If you don't know where to start with this kind of work, creating a profile on this website and creating a carbon footprint and getting a better understanding of what your organization's carbon footprint looks like is a really great place to start if you're looking to reduce that impact. So on a wider scale, the tools will allow us to create a national environmental data set with which we can view trends, set goals, and develop targeted environmental programming. They also provide a solid foundation on which a much larger environmental framework can be built. So we kind of see the tools as like the core of a national environmental framework, because it's kind of an easy and accessible step that you can do if you're not really sure where else to start. But we really want to be building on that and adding to it with education and engagement and increased carbon literacy and collaboration both nationally and internationally on science-based emission targets. There's really a lot of places we can go but we feel that the tools are a really nice starting point for a lot of people, a really nice point of engagement. So yeah, that's oh, that's my last slide. I thought there was a questions and comments slide, but I guess I deleted it. Oh, there is a thank you slide. Okay. This is my big showstopper, my big finale.
It's great. It's great. No, I have to say, I really love, like, I find it very overwhelming to figure out, a carbon footprint and to know where to start. And I'm not sure if that's generational, because it's a learning thing for me. I'm not sure, but this seems so much easier than I assumed it would be. Like, it seems really user friendly from what you've just presented. And I like the fact that you said it's going to be accessible and inclusive, which is amazing because a lot of projects don't necessarily build that in right at the beginning. So that was great. Thank you. So we do have some questions. I'm just going to say to folks, I am monitoring the Facebook, which is why I'm looking over here sometimes. And I just want to say, put in questions in the comment box and we'll ask them, but we have some that have been sent in from folks already. So let's get started. Thank you so much, Devon. That was a really informative presentation. Thank you. So our first question is from a member in Southwestern Ontario. And the question is this: all artists coming to Stone and Sky must take the ferry. How do I calculate the carbon footprint of the ferry? And just so everyone knows, that ferry is the ferry to Pelee Island, just to get some sort of reference there.
Yeah, so that is an option in the tools. And there's a tab called business travel where you can add in, the travel of your employees, but also artists. It is, the ferry is an option that you can put in if you know the number of kilometers that ferry goes. You can add that in by passenger, the number of passengers times the number of trips.
Oh, that's great. And so you would, and I'm just asking this because, like, I really don't know. So it's very interesting. Would you be adding, because it's shared transport, would you be adding just your specific people, or would you be dividing that carbon footprint by everybody that was on the ferry? Like, is that how you figured it out?
Yeah, so certain types of transport in the tools are calculated by vehicle kilometer, which is, so if you're driving a car, how many kilometers is that vehicle going? And then other types of transport, collective transport, like ferries, trains, buses, loads of things, are calculated by passenger kilometer. So there are calculations that have been done, and I mean, everything is estimated.
Yeah.
But it's kind of based on the capacity of that vehicle and the impact of the vehicle going from A to B and divided by passenger. So some types of transport are calculated by passenger kilometers. So you can kind of estimate my personal, if I get on a plane, what is my piece of that footprint?
Yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. Thank you. Okay. We had some questions just come in just a little while ago, so I'm going to skip directly to those ones. Once we've measured our carbon footprint, what steps should we take? Which is more important, carbon offsets or reducing our consumption?
So I'm an advocate for reducing consumption. I see carbon offsets as a last resort. If you have reduced your carbon footprint as much as you possibly can, then paying for carbon offsets to hopefully have some impact is like a good, that's a good call. They're relatively inexpensive, so it's something you can do. And it's something that, most, like a lot of big companies do. Generally, when you see this large multinational company that says we're carbon neutral, it doesn't mean they're actually carbon neutral. It means they're paying for offsets. So they are kind of like a cool thing that can be used as a last resort, but ultimately, preventing those emissions from going into the atmosphere in the first place is a better call, where the clock is ticking, and we can't really afford to be putting much more carbon into the pipelines. So yeah, reduce first, and then carbon offsets are fine.
So for some of our folks out there that this, like me, or that it's fairly new, like we understand some of what's going on, but what is a carbon offset? Like what's that?
So a carbon offset, it's like a credit that you can buy, that will have an impact elsewhere in the world, that will theoretically reduce the carbon the carbon footprint of a project, or sequester carbon. So generally, carbon offsets, they're either like managed forests. You're like paying into trees being planted to sequester carbon, or you're paying into like a clean energy project, a solar farm or a wind farm or something like that. So yeah, that's what they are. You want to be careful about buying carbon offsets, because there are lots and lots of carbon offset projects whose accounting is not really, you're not really having the impact that you would want to have. So when you're looking at carbon offset companies, you want to look for certain standards. So for example, there's one called the gold standard that, is like an internationally recognized carbon offset standard. So look for something like that when you're purchasing carbon offsets.
Oh, thanks for that. That's great. And then we have another question. Even small organizations can make a difference. What are some changes you would suggest for small volunteer organizations, and what can we share with our audiences?
Some changes. Well, I mean, so the big some of the big impacts are actually, especially in the performing arts, in studies that have been done, the biggest impact actually tends to be audience travel. So that can be really, that's a really complicated one, because that's not necessarily within the scope of what the organization itself can control. A lot of organizations are starting to get creative with that one, and they might offer incentives for ride sharing to a show, or if there are enough patrons coming from point A to point B, having a shuttle service or something like that. Obviously, that's not always possible. A shuttle service is more of an option, like if you have a festival. But yeah, those are things that companies are starting to get creative with. A really simple change that can reduce energy consumption a lot is just switching bulbs to LED. LED bulbs, if you have incandescent, LED uses like 95% less energy or something ridiculous. So that's a really big change. If you're in the position to be able to reduce your travel impact by flying less, or taking a different mode of transportation, or driving with somebody, then those are great changes to make as well. Where I think one of the things that I want to stress, especially for smaller organizations, is that this the tool, they're meant to be informative, and not to like shame organizations for their carbon footprints, because the arts have this amazing social impact and can have amazing economic impacts for people. So we don't want to, encourage you to give up activities that are beneficial in other ways. If you're in a fly-in community and you need to get artists somewhere, like those are important impacts. So yeah, I would say, the tools are great to use, but if you feel like you're in this place where, well, we can't reduce this impact because otherwise we'll be, the artists won't get what they need, or our community won't get what we need. Be gentle with yourselves. And there are other ways that that organizations can have positive impacts beyond just carbon reductions. And that's what the Beyond Carbon survey tab is about, is like, you can, if you're showing work that has a message that might engage patrons in climate action, that's valuable. If your organization has is giving up sponsorships from polluting industries in favor of industries with better practices, that's a good action. So yeah, be kind to yourselves, be gentle with yourselves, and learn, and if you can reduce your impacts, then that's really good. But especially for the smaller organizations, it can be really, really tough to make those changes. Hopefully with more organizations having access to accessible carbon footprinting tools, that will give folks information to be able to, let's say, apply for grants to, if you want to do an LED retrofit of your theater, knowing what your carbon footprint is can help you to maybe access some money to do that. I went off on a bit of a tangent, didn't I?
No, actually, it's really interesting because the one thing that always sticks with me as I'm cleaning my recycling, or, making sure my lights are off, like them when aren't being used, even just my home, is like, I always sort of think to myself, like, not every person can do everything, but every person can do one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the tools, like as you're describing and talking more, it's making me personally feel more confident, right? And I can imagine it's doing that for our members too, like, oh wow, this doesn't seem as overwhelming or as daunting, and it does seem that I can achieve maybe a few of the things here and figure out what my carbon footprint is, and start to make a slow change, right? Which I think is fantastic. Um, there's a little footnote here from the person who supplied the last two questions. And that's Sandy, one of our board members. And she says, my concert series focus has stopped using plastic water bottles backstage. We use mason jars with lids and local spring water. Oh, I love that. However, we still run into artists calling for bottled water backstage. That's a big one. I used to be an artist liaison, and you'd fill out the rider, and some of the things people ask for, you're just like, well, can I give you a jug of this amazing well water that's great and clean and not touched by human hands in any way? And people are still asking for specific bottled, so that that is a difficult one.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple other questions. So the program seems to have launched in the UK, and the question was, how successful has it been? Which I think you mentioned a little bit. Was it a 41% reduction over 6 years?
Yeah, that has happened.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Like, that is a massive change, and that's all sort of initiated through Julie's Bicycle sort of initiating this program.
Yeah, I mean, the program in the UK has been incredibly successful in a lot of different ways. And it's also been, that's been a long time in the making. I mean, that 6-year period, it was, that's like 2012 to 2018. There's a specific, when I use that figure, a specific range, but the tools were created first in 2009. So they were, they've been in use for over a decade. And it's continued to, like, their programming has continued to expand and expand. And it's resulted in, the arts and culture sector in the UK being extremely engaged in this topic. But I mean, from what I understand, and I mean, I wasn't engaged in this from the very beginning, but from what I understand, that took, it takes a while for engagement to get that high. But also part of it is that, Arts Council England has this reporting program. So organizations that receive core funding from Arts Council England, their national portfolio organizations, have these reporting standards that, when they do their grant reporting, they also do their environmental reporting. So that's a huge incentive for, like how many organizations would would engage if they didn't have that incentive. We don't know. I think that people would. I mean, it's an extremely popular program, and even though the reporting, there are no punitive measures for not doing your reporting. So I guess in some ways it's voluntary, but they still have 91% compliance with those reporting standards. So it's like people are doing it because they want to. Like it's one of Arts Council England's like most popular programs, and the sector is really into it. So yeah. So there's been a lot of really good work there. So we're aiming to learn from what they've done and emulate their program in certain ways. But obviously, we have it's a different country, and we're, when we're adapting the tools, it's like the tools themselves are different. They have different conversion factors and things like that. But we also have like different social contexts, and we have like this horrific colonial past that we're reconciling with, and that can't be ignored in like a nationwide framework. It has to be centered. So yeah, our program will look different, but I've been really impressed. Even so far, like the tools haven't even launched, and the amount of engagement we've been receiving with people saying that they want to do something like this, they want to use the tools and be more engaged, is like I've been even surprised. Like, I thought I'd received more pushback than I have, but people are really like, wanting to engage. So that's cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to skip to a question that relates to that, which is, what is your hope with the project? Like your overall sort of goal?
Oh, I mean, there are lots of goals. There are lots of hopes. I mean, I think one big one is hoping that the arts and culture sector collectively can really drive this movement in a way that it's currently not driving. There are a lot of activists out there doing really good work, but I mean, a lot of the country, there's a lot of just like, not moving on an extremely pressing issue. So, I've always said like, like the arts and culture sector, calculating the carbon footprint of the arts and culture sector, and reducing it, that's not necessarily because I think that arts and culture are the big polluters and they're the ones driving climate change, but because arts and culture is like arguably the most vocal sector there is, and the one with the power to inspire the most change. And so, yeah, I have this dream that kind of the sector collectively can like create this ripple effect out and really like accelerate the movement in a way that it needs to be accelerated if humanity is going to have a hope.
Yeah. So, and that leads us right into another question. As an environmentalist, what is your biggest fear for our future?
I mean, how dark do we want to get? I mean, uh oh God.
It's a big one, right? That's a big question. Maybe it
Yeah.
has many layers to it for you.
I mean, I fear that I think that the world's, provided I, live to an average age, I think that the world I that exists when I at the end of my life will look dramatically different to the world we have now. I fear, you know, losing people and things that are important to me. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
No. Yeah. And
yeah,
I see too, like I see all of these amazing young people, and specifically, I see a lot of amazing young women, in their late teens, early 20s, being very vocal about, protecting the land and stepping up and what's happening in BC right now, right, with the pipeline and I think a lot of people aren't engaged, and we should be engaged in supporting these young people and also supporting the land and water protectors, right? Um,
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, so let's look at a big one and let's look at a different one. Let's change it up totally and we'll go to a happier place. And do you foresee a time in our future where everyone is more aware of their carbon footprint and seeks a way to reduce it?
I think everyone is I don't know if I'd go that absolute. The vast majority, I think that's probably inevitable. You know, I have definitely noticed a narrative in the past few years, and hopefully that's changing now, where Canadians kind of think that like Canada is this magical place where climate change won't touch them. And I mean, aside from that, it's like, okay, well, don't you care about other people? But also, it's like in BC, we're seeing like truly like apocalyptic outcomes right now.
Mhm.
And I think it's like I hope my like with all my heart that people are finally waking up to like the fact that this is it's very real, it's accelerating, and it will affect you, it will affect everybody, even if it's just like, even if you live in a place that doesn't have a natural disaster, but like the price of your everything skyrockets. Like it will affect everything. It is affecting everything. So I don't think that it can be ignored anymore. Yeah, I think that we will eventually reach a place where the vast majority will care.
Yeah, well, we'll have to, like you said, we'll have to, right? So,
yeah.
Okay, let's circle back a little bit. And we've got a question here. How difficult is it for a small non-techie company to use the tools?
Well, that's the thing, is like the tools have been They have been designed such that you don't have to have technical expertise to be able to use them. We're going to be doing some additional review of like the language on the tools to make sure that it really is as accessible as possible. That you don't need to have like a certain level of education or a certain kind of education to be able to use it. But you know, like there are lots of organizations, like user organizations, where you know their like intern might be the one who's putting in the data, and so we're cognizant of that when we're you know, as we lay things out, but also as we write help text. There's also like, there will be a lot of help. Like we're going to be giving very regular trainings. Like once the tools launch, there will be, we're hoping for like a couple of times a month, offering trainings in English and French with ASL interpretation, so that folks will be able to learn live and also ask questions. And we'll also have like, you know, user guides, FAQs, things like that, so that it takes as much of the guesswork out of it as possible. And then of course, we have a user support team. So it's, you know, you will be able to reach out to somebody who knows the tools, and we can email you, we can have a Zoom call with you, we can have a phone call with you, and help you work through your issues. So
that's great. That sounds really accessible. Like
we hope so.
Really accessible.
Yeah.
And they're free to use, which is amazing. And let me see. I liked that it kind of did the work. You said like it does the work for you, right? Like you put in a few things and then it pops out for you. Like it seems really intuitive. Is that sort of how you must have done a lot of work on the back end to make it that simple for the user.
Yeah, I mean, that's work that Julie's Bicycle has been doing over the course of the last decade, more than a decade. We have also been like, you know, we've done a couple of rounds of user testing, and we've been paying attention to when users say like, this isn't intuitive or this isn't accessible, like trying to find ways that we can, you know, make those changes. It's not always possible, but trying to do our best that at least if something isn't, if we can't make something like so easy on the tools, that we at least have like something in our FAQs or something in a user guide, so that you know, people can use them. Really, the hardest thing about using the tools is finding the data. The input is quite simple, but for a lot of folks, it's like, well, we don't have access to our utility bills because we rent a small space in a bigger building, and like, so what do we do?
Yeah.
And there are things that you can do in those cases. You know, if your landlord can give you a utility bill for like your energy and or your water, you can kind of, you can do a reasonable estimate by like apportioning out your floor area and doing a calculation like that. But, you know, it's not perfect, and that's not always possible. We also have like some default values that, like, for example,
Oh, I think, am I frozen? I'm not sure if you can still see me. I'm not sure. Have we lost Devon? Are you there? I feel like we might have lost Devon for a moment. So I'm just gonna wait a second and see if we're able to get her back. I have to say, in the meantime, I'm learning so much through this presentation, and I really hope you are too. It sounds to me like this is a really great program and something that is achievable for many of us in our small, rural, and remote communities. It looks like we have, okay, thanks, Sandy. Sandy's let me know that Devon was frozen. I'm just going to see if she's going to join back. So I'll wait one more minute. But yeah, overall, it seems to me like the program that Devon has described is quite achievable for many of us in rural and remote communities. Sounds like they've really made a focus on making it accessible, both in language and actual verbiage. So English, French, ASL, LSQ. They are consulting with Indigenous communities and Indigenous consultants to make sure that that is centralized in the tools so that we are not repeating any colonial mistakes and we are working as a whole in the country. So it sounds like a great program. I think we have lost Devon for the night, unfortunately, but I think we were just about to wrap up anyway. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate seeing you here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next expert chat, which will be in January, with Jessa Aguilo of Arts Pond about their new program Together There. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.